It's the rematch nobody wanted. Joe Biden versus Donald Trump. President Biden announced his re-election bid on Tuesday. His big message? The battle for the soul of America is not complete, he says. Full marks for drama, but past experience tells us one thing. You resort to drama when you have no substance. Biden's campaign video talks a lot about decency, honesty, and respect. Listen to this.
The question we're facing is whether in the years ahead we have more freedom or less freedom, more rights or fewer. I know what I want the answer to be, and I think you do too. This is not a time to be complacent. That's why I'm running for re-election. Because I know America. I know we're good and decent people. I know we're still a country that believes in honesty and respect and treating each other with dignity.
Talk about an oversell. Biden's path to the nomination is easy. Sitting presidents do not face much opposition from within the party. So the question is, who will challenge him? Who will the Republican Party nominate? From the looks of it, it will be Donald Trump. He announced his candidacy in November last year, and if he wins, it will be a record of sorts. Only one U.S. president has served 2 non-consecutive terms in America. And this was way back in 1893. Since then, presidents usually do 2 things. They either lose and retire, or they serve 2 consecutive terms and then retire. But then Trump is not your normal president. He isn't campaigning for the soul of America. He's campaigning with a vengeance. We'll get to Trump later. First, let's talk about Biden's chances. He's 80 years old now. He will be 86 by the time his 2nd term ends, if he wins, that is. Now, I'm not big on ageism, but I will say this. The average retirement age in America is 62 years. Teachers retire by 62. Doctors retire by 62. Cops and firemen retire by 62. So should the man with the nuclear codes work till 86? Well, that's for the Americans to decide. Biden has had moderate success in his first term in office. He got some big spending bills passed, like the $1 trillion infrastructure package and the $50 billion chip industry package. The downside of that? Higher inflation. Biden presided over the highest U.S. inflation in 4 decades. It has eased now, but people remember the pain. On foreign policy, he's had a mixed bag. Afghanistan and Ukraine have been disasters, but on Ukraine, he partially salvaged the situation. How? By expanding NATO into the Nordic. Finland has already joined, and Sweden will follow. But some big promises have been forgotten, like the Iran nuclear deal. Biden promised to revive it, but so far, he's not been able to. Under Biden, the U.S. has lost even more strategic space in West Asia. China ended up brokering a deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia. It was unthinkable a few years ago. But Biden's biggest problem is not policy, because let's face it, which president has wowed the world with his policies? Biden's biggest problem is the lack of excitement. You see, Trump has a clear rallying call, make America great again. He's the victim. And Biden is the deep state. The recent indictment has also played into that narrative. Compare that to Biden's slogan, battle for the soul of the nation. What does that even mean? It's good for a James Cameron movie, not so much for an 80-year-old's re-election campaign. Biden benefited in 2020 from a sense of hopelessness, because Democrats basically said anyone but Trump. But 3 years later, the dynamic is different. Trump has consolidated his base, but Biden has consistently lost his. His approval ratings are just 42%. Even among Democrats, it's only 74%. And don't get me wrong, Biden's shortcomings do not make Trump look any better. He was an erratic and bigoted leader. As journalists, we don't miss his 3 a.m. tweets about nuking North Korea. My point is this. Both these men appear unqualified, and Americans agree. A recent poll found that 2/3 of all Americans do not want Biden or Trump. They do not want a 2020 rematch. That tells you a lot about America's political system. Their leaders keep talking about diversity, about how America is a melting pot of cultures, how the American dream is the ultimate dream, yet every 4 years it comes down to the same thing, 2 old white men fighting for the White House. Where is the diversity? Where are the new ideas? Biden will tell you that Trump and right-wing extremism is a threat to U.S. democracy, and he's right. But guess what else is? Billionaire donors and so-called philanthropists putting 80-year-old men in the White House. Our last story tonight is about crickets. Crickets, plural. We're talking about the insect, not the sport. What are your thoughts about having them as food? A lot has been written and said about their nutritional value. And now a Canadian food writer has hit the headlines with her take. She says she uses crickets as baby food. She swapped them for meat and calls the bugs a healthy and extremely cheap source of protein. Now, for some cultures that are used to eating crickets, this may not seem like news. But a lot of the world is just beginning to explore the idea of binging on bugs. Here's more.
We want to give our families the very best to ensure that children grow up hale and hearty. That means making sure they eat their veggies and get plenty of nutrients like protein. After all, it's an essential building block for our bodies. But would you be okay with unorthodox sources of protein? Like insects such as the cricket. A Canadian food blogger named Tiffany Lay definitely doesn't mind. She's been feeding her 18-month daughter crickets and swears by it. Now, crickets aren't some novel food fad. Various cultures around the world have been consuming them for millennia. They're even considered a superfood. Why? Because crickets are full of protein and other nutrients, like vitamin B12, calcium, iron, magnesium, fatty acids, and potassium. And not only are the bugs healthy, they're easy to farm too. They grow fast and have a very high nutrient-to-body ratio. Not to mention, they don't take as much space nor emit as many greenhouse gases as traditional meat sources. So they're good for the planet too. In fact, this is true for all insects that are consumed. And there are a lot. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization says almost 2,000 species of insect are consumed around the world. Eating insects like the cricket is common in Asia, Africa, and South America. Certain indigenous groups in Australia eat them as well. India is no stranger to the practice of insect eating either. From fried udonga montana in Mizoram, known locally as thangnang, to ant chutney in Odisha. Some 40-odd insects are eaten in India, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. Thailand is particularly famous for eating insects, with street stalls lining up to sell crunchy cricket snacks, or in other forms like cricket powder burgers.
We use cricket powder in our burgers to show everybody that the powder, as well as the actual crickets, can be produced into other menus other than street food. Crickets don't have to be on street vendor stalls that are served only with soy sauce. They can be burgers, bakeries, soft cookies, or even paprika seasoning used to flavor French fries. These are all possible.
This cricket powder is what the Canadian food writer feeds her child. It's extremely healthy, being about 65% protein. The powder has been around for a while now. It's easier for people who've never eaten crickets to stomach. Because insect eating is still considered odd or gross, predominantly in the West.
I think people would accept the edible insects more if you make their appearances less scary. You can see foreigners walking past, and they didn't dare try the insects. So if they are processed into something more appealing, then people could eat them more.
There are some risks when eating insects, though. Crickets, for example, are known to carry a large amount of bacteria. They need to be properly sterilized before consumption. But that's true about all meat. So the bottom line is, while they may look disturbing, crickets are a great source of nutrients. And moving towards insect consumption may actually make the world a healthier and greener place.
South Africa is in a fix. Will it leave the ICC or the International Criminal Court? The president hinted at it, but did a quick U-turn. Why does he want to leave? Because the court has issued an arrest warrant against Vladimir Putin. And Putin may visit South Africa for a summit this year. As per the rules, South Africa is bound to detain the Russian president if he visits. But they don't want to do it. So there's talk of leaving the court. Yesterday, President Ramaphosa said his country will exit the ICC. Today, he's made a U-turn saying there is no such plan. In fact, let me read out a statement from the president's office. This is what he said. South Africa remains a signatory to the ICC in line with the resolution of the 55th National Conference of the ANC held in December 2022 to rescind an earlier decision to withdraw from the ICC. ANC is the ruling party of South Africa. The ICC, as you would know, is an intergovernmental court. It was conceived by the UN in 1998 to prosecute war crimes. It started functioning in the year 2002. The ICC is headquartered in The Hague, in the Netherlands. And this is not the first time that South Africa has tried to leave it. In 2016, they tried the same but ended up staying. Then South Africa said it wants to change the court from within. But yesterday, President Ramaphosa spoke about leaving again. Listen to what he said.
Yes, the governing party, the African National Congress, has taken that decision that it is prudent that South Africa should pull out of the ICC, largely because of the manner in which the ICC has been seen to be dealing with these types of problems.
What type of problem is President Ramaphosa talking about? The court's order to arrest Vladimir Putin, the Russian president. Remember last month, the ICC issued an arrest warrant against Putin. On what charges? The forced deportation of hundreds of children from Ukraine. That's a war crime, and Putin has been accused of committing it. Now, as a signatory of the ICC, South Africa is technically bound by its decision. So if Putin visits South Africa in August this year, they will have to detain him. At least that's what the law says. The Russian president may visit for the BRICS summit. South Africa is hosting it this year. Now, it is not certain if Putin will go, but what happens if he does? Will South Africa be forced to lock up the leader of a nuclear-armed nation? And is it really worth it for Pretoria to risk Russia's wrath? So far, South Africa has shown that it doesn't want to get involved in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. It has stayed neutral, refusing to condemn Russia at the United Nations. Pretoria wants a diplomatic solution to the war, and arresting Putin over alleged crimes in Ukraine would hardly be a neutral or diplomatic move. You can see why President Ramaphosa thought it was better to leave the ICC altogether. Because believe it or not, the ICC arrest warrant is binding. All ICC signatories have a duty to detain Putin or anyone else that the ICC wants arrested. It's this exact jurisdiction issue that made South Africa want to quit in 2016 too. Back then, they were facing flack from the ICC over a different arrest. In 2015, Sudan's former leader, Omar al-Bashir, went to South Africa. He was there for an African Union summit, and he too had an ICC arrest warrant against him over war crimes. South Africa did not arrest Bashir. It got an earful from the ICC, and that's why it wanted to leave. But it's a difficult process. After a lot of legal and regulatory hurdles, they decided not to exit. It took them 7 years to declare that. So clearly, escaping the ICC is not easy. And considering all of this, what can the ICC do if South Africa does not lock Putin up? Honestly, not very much. It doesn't really have any teeth, the court. It needs national governments to cooperate. And if they don't, they'll get a lecture, but that's it. And countries can leave the ICC even if it's a long, drawn process. At present, the US, Russia, China, and India are among the dozens of nations where the ICC holds no jurisdiction. In fact, the US goes one step further. It has a law that allows it to free any American imprisoned by the International Criminal Court. It's been nicknamed the Hague Invasion Act. I'm not making this up. So clearly, the ICC does not hold much weight globally. If Putin does decide to visit South Africa, he is unlikely to be arrested. But South Africa wants to avoid the drama. And it seems there's no easy way to do it. In Europe, two countries are sparring over a rocket. Sweden launched a research rocket. It was supposed to conduct research for the Swedish Space Corporation, which means it was meant to stay in space. But it couldn't quite hold itself there. It came down pretty hard. Sweden planned for it to land back on its territory. That didn't work out either. Instead, the rocket crash-landed in Norway. And now Norway is calling the crash a quote-unquote border violation. It's pretty furious. After all, the rocket could have caused a lot of damage. But why was Norway caught off guard, and what does it say about Sweden's space program? Our next report tells you more.
Sweden was feeling ambitious on Monday. It launched a research rocket from the Esrange Space Center. The rocket was carrying out experiments at an altitude of 250 kilometers, experiments in zero gravity. But the rocket didn't last in zero gravity for a long time. It malfunctioned and came roaring down, hitting Norway. It crashed into a mountainside in Norway's far north. Fortunately, the closest inhabited area was about 10 kilometers away from the crash site, so no injuries or material damage has been reported. But this hasn't stopped Norway from lashing out at its neighbor. Norway's foreign ministry has made a big claim. It says the country was not informed about either the rocket's landing or the recovery of its payload. In a statement, Norway's foreign ministry said, "When such a border violation occurs, it's crucial that those responsible immediately inform the relevant Norwegian authorities through the proper channels." Notice how Norway has called the incident a border violation. Even if it was an accident, Norway has made it a point everyone knows that its borders were violated. Not by a Russian missile or rocket, not by a stray Ukrainian projectile, but by a rocket fired by Sweden. And that's not where Norway stopped. It also said, the crash of a rocket like this is a very serious incident that can cause serious damage. Serious damage to whom? To Norway and its people? Or to the relations between Sweden and Norway? Meanwhile, the primary scientific instrument on the rocket has been recovered. It's back in Sweden. Esrange, which launched the rocket into space, is embarrassed. It said, and I quote, "This is a deviation that we take seriously." Deviation, they say. Norway has termed it unauthorized activity. Its primary complaint with Sweden is that it wasn't informed about the launch, that it wasn't even told about the imminent crash on time. It only learnt about the crash after Sweden put out a press release on Monday, and that's not standard practice. The incident is not good news for Sweden or its space corporation. The European Space Agency has some big plans, so do some space startups. They want to use Sweden's Esrange launch site for high-stakes tests. But accidents like these could mean the loss of crucial space business for Sweden. Of course, space exploration was never easy. It comes with a host of complications, which is why Sweden isn't the only country making headlines today. Japan is in the same boat too. Tokyo-based iSpace wanted to become the first company to place a lander on the moon intact. But its mission has ended in failure. iSpace lost contact with the lander. It now believes that the spacecraft crashed into the moon's surface. So space is a tricky area, and communication among countries and space agencies when something goes wrong is key. Norway says Sweden did nothing of that sort on Monday.
Email exchanges from inside the BBC, they talk about the risk of violating Indian laws. It's easier to rake up the freedom of speech debate, but does it give anyone a free pass to knowingly violate the law? America supports India because it needs India's support in return. And India is working with the US because it suits India's interests. This is how geopolitics works. Last night, he diffused a crisis with his defense minister. But today, Netanyahu was confronted with a new problem. His cabinet seems to have rebelled against him. The UK is looking at the Indian subcontinent to fill its coffers. That India seems to be negotiating from a position of power, like a partner and not a former colony. The US and Russia are dangerously close to an armed conflict. This year, 2023, New Delhi will be the capital of global diplomacy. For a country as diverse as ours, with 88% of the population illiterate, it was a very big deal to write a constitution, and that too, the world's largest. Meanwhile, if we may, here's a Republic Day gift from India for the BBC. A list of suggestions for the BBC for their upcoming documentaries. Number 1, the Kohinoor and the colonial loot. Number 2, an outdated monarchy and unhealthy obsession with the royals. Number 3, racism in 2023. We're waiting.